You've heard the word sin, right? It's a heavy one. We use it for everything from, eating that extra slice of cake to the absolute worst things a person can do. But what if the way we even think about sin, the very concept itself, actually shapes who we are on a fundamental level? Well, that's what we're going to dig into.
So, that brings us right to the heart of it all. Is there a real, meaningful difference between just, doing something wrong and committing what some people would call a sin? The answer might be a lot more profound and honestly way more fascinating than you'd think.
To really get this, we have to start by looking at sin not just as a bad feeling or a simple mistake, but as a very specific theological idea, with its own set of rules and its own internal logic.
And our journey starts with this one Greek word, hamartia. Now, this is the big one, the most common biblical term for sin, and its literal meaning is just so perfect: to miss the mark. I want you to picture an archer, okay? They're aiming for the bullseye, they let the arrow fly, and it just falls short. That is the core image here, a failure to hit a very specific divine target. So missing the mark is way deeper than just, oops, I made a mistake. It's really about a relationship that's been broken. See, from a theological perspective, sin isn't just about what you do, it's a state of being. It's a willful act of turning away from a divine standard. It's seen as a rebellion, a breach in our relationship with God that happens when we decide our own will is more important. And yeah, the complexity doesn't stop there. This theological framework gets super specific, breaking sin down into different categories. You've got original sin, which is this idea of an inherited condition we're all born into. Then there are actual sins, the stuff we actually do, say, or even think. And it even makes a distinction between sins of commission, that's doing something you're not supposed to, and sins of omission, which is failing to do something you were supposed to. This detailed system just goes to show how central this whole concept really is.
Okay, so now that we have a handle on the theological sin, let's put it up against the secular idea of just wrongdoing. This is really where you can see the huge divide between these two worldviews.
The biggest difference, the real kicker, is where they come from, their foundations. Theological sin is built entirely on divine revelation. We're talking sacred texts and tradition. The whole idea is that it's an offense against a personal God. But secular wrongdoing, that's founded on human reason, on our conscience. It's a violation of a social or rational code that we, as people, figure out and agree on.
And this quote from the Psalms, it just perfectly captures the essence of theological sin. Against you, you alone have I sinned. The number one victim, the one who's ultimately offended in this framework, is God. That God-centric focus is everything. It's the key.
So let's just boil it down. Sin, in the theological sense, is an offense against a person, God. And it's something that requires a divine fix or atonement. A moral transgression, on the other hand, is a violation of a code, a social or rational one. It definitely leads to guilt and shame, sure, but not necessarily a separation from some divine being. Okay, so we've laid out these two very different frameworks, but what do they actually do to us? I mean, how do they affect us on the inside? In this final section, we're going to explore the psychology of belief and see how these different ways of looking at morality actually shape our inner world.
Let's start with something called cognitive dissonance. You know that really uncomfortable, squirmy feeling you get when your actions don't line up with your beliefs? That's it. Now, within the Christian concept of sin, this conflict is huge. It's existential. You have this inherited sinful nature clashing with a divine standard that's basically unattainable. It can create this constant high-level tension. In the secular view, the dissonance is more about your behavior. And here's the key. It's resolvable. You can either change your behavior, or you can adjust your beliefs to match. Now, what about personal agency? Free will. The doctrine of original sin can suggest that our human will is kind of compromised from the get-go. Moral failure is seen as pretty much inevitable, and making a truly good moral choice depends on getting divine grace. That can sometimes lead to a feeling of powerlessness. The secular view, though, it assumes you have full autonomy. Failure isn't inevitable. It's a choice or an error in judgment, which actually reinforces your power to learn from it and change. And wow, this has a huge impact on self-esteem. In the theological model, your worth is often extrinsic. It comes from outside of you, from being created and redeemed by God. So a failure, a sin, can reaffirm this core identity of being a depraved sinner. But in the secular model, your worth is more intrinsic. It comes from within. A failure is just an event. It was a bad action, sure, but it's not a reflection of your fundamental nature. The guilt is about the deed, not about who you are as a person. See the difference?
And finally, accountability. Where does the buck stop? Under the sin framework, your ultimate accountability is to God, and it's often something that's deferred to the afterlife. Forgiveness comes through divine grace. Now, a secular critique of this is that it can create a moral hazard. This idea that you can be easily forgiven without actually making things right with people here on earth. In contrast, secular accountability is immediate. It's to yourself, to the victims, and to society. And restoration isn't just about confessing. It requires making reparations.
So if there's one thing to take away from this whole explainer, it's this. Our moral frameworks are incredibly powerful. Whether we call a mistake a sin or a wrongdoing isn't just semantics. These concepts do more than just judge our actions. They literally get in there and shape our identity, our very sense of who we are.
Which really just leaves us with one final question. And this isn't about which system is right or wrong. It's about being self-aware. So take a second and think about it. How does your personal framework for right and wrong shape who you are? Thanks for joining me on this one.